In today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how and why depersonalization affects our memories. And once you understand this, this can seriously help to eliminate and reduce the fear surrounding memory loss. Hi, and welcome to Mental Health Power. So one of the major symptoms that people can experience if they have depersonalization is memory loss, but specifically it's short-term memory loss. So the typical experience I had for basically every day, all the time for about 10 years, thankfully I don't have this issue anymore, was just not being able to remember things. And I really mean as in to this extreme sometimes of somebody telling me something and then 5 seconds later, I've not only forgotten what they've said, but I could sometimes forget the entire event that happened. That's how bad it used to be. And so, of course, you can imagine the kind of fears that come from this, where you can't even remember things. And over time, things got better, but memory was always an issue. And so this is why, based on my own experience from recovery from 10 years of depersonalization, exactly what's going on in terms of why we can't remember things. So we first have to understand several parts of our mind. So this is just my own model. I don't think there's an official model. So this is just how I see it. So I mentioned before in my other videos, the conscious mind, the subconscious mind. So I won't go into details to really explain what those are. The main thing to understand for this video in terms of memory is our short-term memory is really experienced in the conscious mind. So the conscious mind in this regard is where we actually experience our mind most of the time. So when we're thinking things, when we're imagining things, and when we remember things, when we recall them. And the subconscious deals with the short-term memory and all of the things we don't have to think about, like our habits. Our dreams happen in our subconscious mind as well. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I could go into, but I've talked about those in my other videos, so I'll put a link up here with the best video that goes into explaining the difference between the conscious subconscious mind. So really, to understand how depersonalization affects the memory, we firstly have to understand the two first parts of how we actually gain a memory in the first place. And so the first thing to understand is that we are ultimately the observer of our mind. So we are the observer of our thoughts. We can observe memories. We can observe anything that our mind comes up with. This also means we observe symptoms that are created from depersonalization and anxiety and depression, because these are all ultimately all related. So firstly, understand this. That's the first point, that we are this point of awareness, and this point of awareness, I see it as residing in the conscious mind. So when you're listening to your mind, you can hear trains of thought. When you're remembering something, you can observe that. So you are the observer of these mental experiences. So this is really who we are here, this point of awareness. Now, when we place our point of awareness onto something, so let's say I'm right now placing my point of awareness here on this pen. So what I'm doing now is I am giving it attention. So I am paying attention to this pen using my awareness. So my point of awareness is now on this, so I'm paying attention to this. So we can only really pay attention to one thing at a time. Yes, I know we can multitask, but what's really happening when we multitask is we're shifting our point of attention very, very quickly to multiple things. This is often why multitasking is not always the most efficient way to do things, and often just doing one thing from beginning to end at a time tends to be much faster. So we have a point of awareness, we place our point of awareness onto something, so one thing, and the longer we place our attention on something, that is now us concentrating on that thing. So the longer I focus on this pen, the longer my point of awareness is paying attention to it, I am now concentrating on it. And so the longer that I concentrate on this, the more information my mind is taking in, right? So this is the recording aspect. So now I'm recording information into my mind. So once we've done that, so I've recorded all the details, all the colors, all the lighting, that kind of stuff, any information I can get about this pen, the longer that I pay attention to it. And so then this becomes stored in short-term memory. So our short-term memory are the things that we can right now remember and we can hold in our memory. So as an example, if someone asked you to go to the shops to buy, let's say 5 things, but you weren't allowed to write them down, you would need to store that in your short-term memory, right? So it's generally supposed to be that between maybe 5 to 9 things as an average people can hold in their short-term memory. This of course will depend on the person. So I've put here a representation of the short-term memory. So I put 6 different slots. So you could say in our conscious mind, we can really only hold, as an example for this person, 6 things. So if we use the example of the shopping list, so they would have to probably keep repeating and reminding themselves over and over again of the things they want to buy. Maybe they'll visualize it, but either way it's happening in their conscious mind and it's in the short-term memory. And if they don't keep doing that, they'll forget. Why is this? Because to remember this in the short-term memory, their point of awareness will have to keep placing attention inwards in their mind to keep reminding themselves of the things they need to buy. So if you think about, let's say these are the things that they're going to buy, and okay, so to keep remembering it, they have to keep reminding themselves enough times to keep it in their short-term memory. So each time they do that, they're placing their attention, they're paying attention to these things to keep it going. So these are now recorded and are maintained in a short-term memory. It's actually very similar to how RAM works on a computer. So you load up all these programs and they take up a certain amount of memory in your computer's RAM. But the moment you close it, gone, right? Unless you've saved it and it goes into long-term memory, a hard drive, the moment you stop remembering these things, eventually they'll disappear from your short-term memory. So what's happening in terms of depersonalization? Because depersonalization has often so many symptoms, so the visual haze, the intrusive thoughts that come from it, the anxiety, the fear, the stress, the after images, the general experience and sensation of things not feeling real, detachment from your body, there are just so many things going on that it completely fills up your short-term memory. Of course, this will depend on the severity of the symptoms and the day, because this can change hour to hour, day by day, in terms of how bad it can get. From my experience, when it was really bad, you cannot concentrate on anything long enough, so you can't place your point of attention, you can't place your awareness on something long enough to maintain your attention on it so that you can concentrate long enough to record information. So you basically lose your ability to record information effectively. Of course, some things you may be able to remember, it depends, but generally it becomes so much harder to record information because it's just, you have, let's say, so imagine all of these represent the symptoms that your point of awareness is having to place attention to. And why is that? Because it's scary. So it's constantly seeing them as a threat. So your point of attention is just constantly moving backwards and forwards through all of these different potential threats that are inwards. So with the thoughts, intrusive thoughts, with the fears, with all the difficult and painful emotions, the anxiety, with all the visual things you're seeing, it's just constantly darting around. So if someone comes to you and says, hey, can you go and buy that thing from the shop? You'll pick up on that to an extent. You'll say yes, but then it may not make it into your short-term memory, or if it does, it cannot stay there long enough. And so that's often why you have to write things down, you have to rely on reminders and that kind of thing. The next part of this is to understand, okay, but there can be times when you do pay attention to something long enough and yet later on you still forget it. And this is because after we've recorded information, so once it's been in our short-term memory for long enough, especially if we've repeated it enough times, because now the way I see it is more data, more information has been taken in. Now it will be stored in long-term memory. So technically everything we experience is stored in our subconscious mind. But our ability to recall that information, so the memory, still relies on our short-term memory. Because if you have, let's say, a memory stored here, let's say this represents the memory, to actually experience the memory, it still needs to go in one of these slots of short-term memory so we can hold that memory in there to experience it. But if your short-term memory, as I said before, is still taken up by all of those symptoms, then even remembering something is difficult because it won't stay in your short-term memory. And to recall things, you need a cue as well. So you need something that reminds you of it. So what used to happen to me is sometimes even when I write things down, I would still sometimes get to, let's say, what I wanted to do. I'll look at the reminder that I'd put for myself and I wouldn't really remember what it was for because the short-term memory was just taken up by all of the depersonalization symptoms. And so what this means is that to effectively remember things, you have to record and you have to be able to recall them, but you need a clear mind, a reasonably clear mind, to be able to do that. And it's very difficult for your mind to become clear if you've got all of that stuff going on in your head and your point of attention, your awareness is constantly being distracted by all of the things you're experiencing. So you can imagine then, if this is affecting your memory affects so many things. So your concentration, but specifically your memory affects a massive amount of our life experiences, because this also explains why depersonalization affects our perception of time, because we have to remember and have a kind of feeling for how long has passed, which requires memory. So this is why when you have depersonalization, a day can just vanish because you got to the end of the day, but you can't recall it now. So normally we can have maybe, not perfect recall, but a general recall of what we did during a day, because we have the ability to bring into our short-term memory. But if you don't have that ability, or if it's very difficult, then your perception of time is going to be all over the place. This also affects your learning. So learning things is harder. So reading, for example, is harder because you're constantly being distracted and your mind is constantly looking at these different threats. This also affects your relationships, because when you talk to people, you need to obviously remember what they're saying and pay attention for long enough. But if you can't fully remember conversations, or you forget what you're saying because all these symptoms are going on and you can't store it in your short-term memory, that gets affected. And it affects your identity as well, because if you can't remember large parts of your life experiences for years, then that really has an effect on how you see yourself. It also affects how you see yourself in relation to other people, because sometimes you can forget what experiences you had with someone. So people you are close to can sometimes feel more like acquaintances because you don't fully recall things that you did with them. But of course, this changes over time. The more you focus on reducing the depersonalization symptoms. So I will do another video that goes more into how to improve memory, but that's going to be quite a big video, so I wanted to keep that separate. So that's today's video. I hope this helps, because once you just gain the understanding of what's going on, that actually can already help to reduce the fear, because a lot of fear just comes from not understanding what's going on. So thanks for watching. If this has been helpful, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.